Good afternoon, and welcome to our early evening session at the second GMIS. It was great to hear from President Putin laying out the landscape for the fourth industrial revolution, and I would also suggest a very sober assessment of how it dovetails with the Sustainable Development Goals and the targets to 2030, which we'll be debating today. I don't want to overplay our hand here at the second GMIS summit, but it is a critical game of poker because we want to see the advancement of economic development, particularly in the least developed countries around the world, but also stay on target for our 2030 plans and the SDGs. And there's two key forces at play: economic development and poverty reduction, but also dealing with the climate change urgency that the President was talking about. Our next hour will discuss these things in tandem because they do go together, as the video was suggesting here. Great opportunity, but also great risk if we don't manage it well. Let's give a warm welcome at the end of each of our introductions of the speakers. Let's welcome the co-chair of the GMIS, His Excellency Engineer Suhail Al-Mazroui, the Minister of Energy and Industry from the UAE, can come on to the stage. Director General of the United Nations Industrial Development Organization, or UNIDO, Li Yong. Mr. Li. His Excellency Denis Manturov, the Minister of Industry and Trade from Russia, of course. And representing the investment sector, and one that's very active here in the Russian Federation, His Excellency Khaldun Al-Mubarak, the Group Chief Executive Officer of Mubadala Investment Company. Thank you very, very much, gentlemen. This couldn't ask for a better panel, actually, to round out our first day at the summit. I thought, if I can start with His Excellency Suhail Mazroui, I thought that was quite a realistic assessment by President Putin. And we had a chance to open this summit with the potential of the fourth industrial revolution. It does offer great potential, but I think what we want to get to here in the hour that we have together is to make the calibrations to make sure that we don't widen the poverty gap. And this is a question for both you as the Minister of Industry and Energy in the UAE, the co-chair, but one that helped create the GMIS and the initiative today. And this is also a question for the Director General as well. How do you make the correct calibration in embracing the Industrial Revolution, but at the same time be aware of the SDGs and the targets that we have set out to 2030? Your Excellency, why don't you start and we'll pick it up from there.
Thank you, John, and it's a great pleasure to address this audience here. I think the dream that we started with when we started the Global Manufacturing and Industrialization Summit together with UNIDO is the connectivity, connecting with the least developing countries, trying to spread the governance, as institutions, but at the same time engage with the private sector, with the companies, and try to share the learnings starting from the process that you have encouraging such investments, but also the learnings you have to institute in your educational system and in your manufacturing and engagement. I think we are living at an age where the transformation of knowledge is much easier than the decades before. So we are hoping that through the Global Manufacturing and Industrialization Summit that is going to be going for different countries and engaging with different audience coming, like we see here in Yekaterinburg, coming from different countries, that engagement between the manufacturing and those governments and ministers from those governments and companies, and most importantly, SMEs that we are focusing on, I think we can get the contribution and the share, and they get a fair share of the fourth industrial revolution in accordance with the United Nations SDGs.
Good. Director General Lee, I think you pointed this out at our press conference today with the other co-chairs, which was excellent. But you are very mindful of the gap not widening, because we have a record in the wealth gap between the wealthiest in the world and the least wealthiest of the world today. We don't want the fourth industrial revolution to leave those behind. So what is UNIDO doing in partnership with the UAE in this instance, and having it here at the heart, in the heartland of Russia, to make sure that doesn't happen, in your view? Can we wake up to the challenge is the key question here, please.
Thank you very much, John. This is an issue actually facing by all of us. Whether we would like to expand this gap or we would like to reduce this gap is very important for us to look at the 2030 development agenda. Because of a new industrial revolution, as I mentioned already, it's create lots of opportunities, also concerns. Jobs being reduced is a most dangerous concern, actually, to all the countries. I think some statistics released recently, by 2030, 20 million jobs will be stolen away by the robots, actually.
You're suggesting 20 million just in robotics?
Just by that. I think the most affected countries are least developed countries. Because why I mention this? Because look at the labor market movement and also means of production and government policy. Least developed countries actually really reacted so slowly towards this kind of new industrial revolution, artificial intelligence, digitalization or so. But labor-intensive industry now located where? Asia, from the Southeast Asia country, now the China, now shifted to Africa. But this new industrial revolution really will damage that kind of labor market for labor-intensive jobs. This is why I think that we should put emphasis on supporting the country with this kind of challenge. So UNIDO is preparing this kind of programs, start from the innovative ways. We call it Program for Country Partnership. This is really building the industrial strategies, policies to deal with the new challenge. This is most fundamental, because without this kind of comprehensive policy strategy, country will not move. One company, two company cannot do that. Secondly is that UNIDO will promote some of the technology transfer and help country to have this kind of opportunity to connect it to those kind of Internet of Things, new technologies, etc. South-South cooperation. GMIS is a really important forum we created. I appreciate UAE government's initiative now being welcomed by all our member countries, because through this forum communication, they can learn how government can react, how companies can adapt to a new situation, and also taking into consideration of the young people, women, for job security, for training, etc.
Okay,
those are the work we are doing.
Great. A quick follow-up question before I bring in His Excellency the Minister from Russia. Does it require a change of thinking? And I think this will be a good subject for His Excellency Khaldun al-Mubarak as an investor as well. A change of thinking by the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, the other United Nations organizations to adapt to this change, that the investment should be targeted so people can adapt to the change that's on the table. Do you want to tackle that, Director General? Then I'll bring in the Minister as well. Do you think that the lending institutions need to re-engineer themselves for the pace of change that we're addressing here at the GMIS?
Yes, of course. Now I believe that this platform gives us opportunity to open the mind, open the vision to all the people, all the participants here. They are representing government, represent research institutions, represent companies, also individuals, expertise, NGOs. But most important is institutional development is one of the key. I'm very happy to see that among the many of the side events, one of that is institutional building, governance and government policy, industrial strategy. That is an important part of the GMIS.
Good. Mr. Manturov, I'd like to have you pick up on President Putin. He says this era offers great opportunity, but we can't be blind going into this tunnel at this stage. What are the policies that you're looking at in trade and industry, particularly with your educational expertise in Russia, to leverage the opportunity and at the same time trying to manage the goals of the SDGs, would you suggest?
The main subject of this panel is nature-inspired technology. So this is not a new direction. And I'm saying this because technologies in general mimic what we see in nature. When we look at technology development over the last 2.5 centuries, we see many things. Look at isolation materials that we have developed. This is something that was inspired by nature. This is a simulation of goose feathers or corrosion-resistant coating. This is the scale of sharks. Photosynthesis is another technology inspired by nature. When you're asking me where we are going next and what technologies we are going to focus on, we are a country that is on a stable development track. We are developing our industry, and we are not behind other countries in terms of technologies that are relevant to today's markets. The president said what we are witnessing today. The main contributor to environmental pollution is energy production industry. Look at a number of countries as an example. Coal-firing generation accounts for 60% in China. In the United States, it's 30%. In Russia, it only accounts for 15%. If you look at Germany, the so-called German crisis or the German paradox, the country is getting rid of nuclear power plants, substituting them with renewable sources of power, but they are buying more coal because it is impossible to quickly and effectively replace old capacities. If you compare the volume of CO2 produced by Russia and Germany, you can see that we're producing significantly less. At the same time, like Germany, despite the fact that those technologies are not fully developed, like wind generation, we do more to create such technologies, enhance them. We understand that it takes time. It also takes time to learn those technologies completely to make sure that they do us good. In Norway, 98% of the energy mix comes from wind power plants. That is their path of development. This is the cleanest country in terms of the environment. They can afford to use electric vehicles. And then again, let's look at it. This means production of electricity. If you compare that to diesel generation, we're talking about 130 to 140 grams per kilometer of CO2. When you look at electric vehicles, if you take into account production of electricity for batteries and charging of this battery, we're looking at the same 130 to 140 grams per kilometer. When we look at Norway as an example, they can afford it. If we look at Germany, no offense, we're talking about 250 grams of CO2 per kilometer. That is 70% more. CO2 emissions than in the case when we use diesel engines. This is a paradox. But then again, if we look at e-vehicle programs, in Norway they have 49% of electric vehicles. That's how many they are buying in Norway every year. In Germany, it's 2%. It's 4% in China. We have 0.01%, unfortunately. But we are interested in development of these technologies. Today, in the morning, myself and my colleagues, ministers from Eurasian Economic Union, were talking about it. What should be the right line of development to use some base technologies? And we came to the conclusion that if we were to develop together at fundamental and applied level superconductor technologies or new types of batteries, that would be very relevant. That is what we want to invest into to make sure that we have good multiplier effect, not just in e-vehicles, but also in power generation to make sure that we store the energy. There are many different directions that I could list.
And the future is very good here for the use of the fundamental research where we see the demand of the market.
You bring up, because a lot of people look at electric vehicles, and I had this conversation with His Excellency who's sitting to your left. Often people don't take into consideration the life cycle of a product and the investment as we make the transition from hydrocarbons to renewables, and something we're focusing now at CNN. I wasn't going to start here, Your Excellency Haldun Mubarak, but I think it's prescient after what Minister Mansurov was suggesting. I think it was 5 years ago, the Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Zayed of Abu Dhabi, was talking about planning for the next 50 years. And if we plan correctly in diversification in the UAE, we can welcome the last export of the final barrel out of the country. How is that reflected in your investment portfolio at Mubadala Investment Company and the country of the UAE now? Planning for the future, for the fourth industrial revolution, and this is a follow-up from the minister as well in terms of the diversification of the energy supplies. But is that reflective in your investment portfolio, in your partnerships in Russia, for example, as well?
Absolutely. In short, it is absolutely reflective. If you go back to 1999, and I would say that would be the first stages of the establishment of Mubadala, which is an investment company, obviously a sovereign fund of the government of Abu Dhabi. If you go back to 1999, 100% of our investment portfolio was in the energy sector. Jump 20 years later, 2019, I sit with you here today, less than 20%.
Wow.
So over the last 20 years, our journey of investment has essentially been a reflection of exactly what you just outlined, which was that vision of His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed, the Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi, of looking at the future and looking at how we can diversify from a country, from an economy dependent on a natural resource, in this case oil and gas, to an economy that continues to invest in that sector, but at the same time evolves into a fully diversified economy. We've done that in the investment side, and I think Mubadala is an example of that through that journey I just described.
Okay, let me follow up, because a lot of people aren't aware of the new bilateral relationships that have emerged over the world in the last 5 years. I think it's particularly prescient in the Middle East, the tilt to the east, whether it's been in China and that effort over the last 15 years. I think it's incredibly prescient over the last decade of what the UAE has done with Russia. Can you tell us about institutional Russia and the ability to invest in a whole range of sectors as a sovereign fund, and the sort of return you're getting, and what sectors you're looking at that hold potential in this concept, Mr. Mubarak, in the fourth industrial revolution at the same time?
So our story in Russia is about a 10-year journey. We started our introduction into investing into the Russian market started in 2010, so almost 9 years ago. And over this journey, what we've done is we've started institutionally, first of all, by learning about the Russian economy, the Russian multiple industrial sectors, deciding how we are going to enter this market, what would be the best approach, finding the right partners. And at the beginning of our journey, what we've done is we've partnered with our equivalent, which is the Russian Development Investment Fund, RDIF, which is the sovereign fund of the government of Russia. That became our entry platform, having a strong and capable and knowledgeable partner of the economy. Through that, we've evolved. We've got to know the economy. We've done a lot of investments. We have, deployed hundreds of millions of dollars in investments here in Russia in over at least 40 different transactions. And that led us to the next evolution, which was about little over 2 years ago, where we established our office, our investment office in Moscow. We have 24 executives, at least, in that office. They speak Russian. We have Russians, and we have Emiratis, and other, obviously, nationalities based in this office. That has given us now knowledge on the ground and ability and maturity to start also investing directly. And I can tell you from our experience, it's been a successful experience. We have invested well. We have had good returns. We have good yields, double-digit returns. We've exited our investments with good returns. By the way, in a very challenging period. If you look at the last 5 years, to be specific, it's not been the easiest of periods. But having said that, there are a lot of opportunities. I think there's a side of Russia that's important to point out from an institutional investor as Mubadala that's been present, investing and continues to invest in Russia. There are very good opportunities. There are strong and very capable industrial and institutional partners. And I think it's been a very successful journey for us.
Great. I'm going to circle back about your other offices in the world and what you're investing in terms of technology transfer capability to bring that technology back to the UAE. But it's a question also for the Minister of Energy. I've always interviewed you in the context of OPEC and the rotating presidency you held there. But there's an effort, even with a country blessed with oil and now exploring for gas, to diversify your energy mix for the SDGs. So how difficult is it to implement that policy into a country that's been spoiled by natural resources, to convince your society to come along for the ride of the fourth industrial revolution, but also the goals to 2030 at the same time, Minister?
I don't think it's difficult when you have a leadership that sets a vision on the future. So you started with His Highness vision, what's going to happen 50 years from now? How are we going to invest in our education and our diversification? UAE have started diversifying its income away or in different sectors. Among them, I think His Excellency Khaldoon Mubarak is in charge of one of those institutions. But today you look at us after 47, 48 years of creating the country or depending on oil. Today, oil is less than 30% of our GDP, oil income. And I think the diversification in our economy led us also to diversify in our energy sources. So we looked at the future, we looked at the challenges as per the SDG major elements and what is happening around us and where is the concentration. And we looked at what do we have in terms of renewable energy. We have the sun. And we have actually, we're not only blessed with oil, we are blessed with a very nice intensity of solar that we can develop. We start investing in solar energy when every country in the region was not even keen to look at it. And that was an investment that started by Mubadala, creating a company called Masdar, that led us to think and evolve. And in 2017, we launched a strategy taking us to the 2050 with a 50% green sources of energy that are non-fossil. Among them, primarily going to be solar, but also combined with nuclear power. So today, we are progressing on that plan, and we are very happy, actually, looking at the evolution of the cost. It has been a great, I think, success story that we are keep telling to different countries, and we are investing as well in different countries in renewable energy. So I think the diversification have been economically attractive for us. We managed to reduce the cost, but also we are developing this strategy to reduce CO2 emission in the country by 70% by the year 2050. We want our city to be among the cleanest cities in the world. We think the challenge of the future is going to be having a clean city where people will be aspiring to live. So achieving that without a focus on diversifying the energy sources toward renewable energy, regardless how much oil and gas you have, is not the right approach if you're not doing it. So I think we're happy with the strategy. We are evolving in it, and we are keen to also look at investments in renewable energy in other nations and spread this success story.
To take the model elsewhere. Go ahead, Director General.
John, may I add a little bit more information about the country with oil, natural resource rich countries? Actually, UAE is one of good example, focusing on the renewable strategy, diversified economy. I visit the country in that region, Kuwait, Saudi, and those countries. They all develop the strategy to diversify the economy and focusing on the renewable energies. This is very impressive. Like Kazakhstan, it has natural resources, natural gas, oil.
Both solar and wind in Kazakhstan, actually. Yeah.
It focuses on the renewables and energy efficiency. Those become national strategy priority. Another example is Mexico. Mexico is an oil-rich country, and it developed a resource efficiency, energy efficiency law more than 10 years ago. And this is a very good strategy for country to move ahead. It doesn't mean that a natural resource-rich country will lose their vision. And their leadership, their vision really helps country to move ahead with a global agenda.
Excellent point. I want to bring in Minister Mantarov and then Haldun al-Mubarak again. I don't want to be the doomsayer about the job losses because of artificial intelligence. I mean, a McKinsey survey pegs it at about 500 million jobs by 2030, which is quite radical in itself. And that doesn't mean we won't create other jobs, but it's a challenge. But Minister, have you looked, and I'll invite His Excellency from Mubadala to do the same, at the potential for artificial intelligence in Russia, for example, because of your engineering prowess, the impact it could have on smart cities, on environmental awareness, on efficiencies within the manufacturing chain. How are you implementing artificial intelligence into the manufacturing bases of Russia today? And then I'd like to ask Mr. Al-Mubarak about investing in artificial intelligence technologies as well. Let's start with the minister.
Just yesterday, at the main panel discussion at INNAPROM, we discussed artificial intelligence, AI. I was listening to heads of companies, and I spoke then, maybe not on the topic, but I said that we talk a lot about AI, artificial intelligence, but at the same time, we don't have a common understanding of what it is. We don't have a common approach. Every single person has his own idea what AI is. And we all arrived at the conclusion that we are not talking about AI. We're talking about a human intelligence that formulates algorithms for machines, and then machines dutifully self-learn and self-teach. But this is still based on human intelligence. And therefore, man is who develops all of those areas that are associated with the digital economy. That's another term we use on top of artificial intelligence. So we're trying to digitalize our economy. We are working along these two parallel tracks. And let me say that, objectively speaking, about 10% of companies that are actively implementing in their logistics and management processes contemporary IT products, automation processes, contemporary and state-of-the-art equipment, putting that into operation. This is all being done as we speak. 40% of companies who potentially are ready for this or getting ready for this are ready to adapt these state-of-the-art technologies to their needs, to modernize their existing production processes. About 50% of companies are not yet ready to start implementing all things digital as far as their production and manufacturing is concerned. But if I may, I would like to comment on what you asked about the loss of jobs. I don't think we are in danger of being there, of losing those jobs. And I will explain why. Because we can see now that we feel a deficiency for workforce. Right now, our unemployment is at 4.8% across the economy. And speaking about the processing industry, that's even less than that. But you perfectly understand, I'm sure, that this is just statistics, dry statistics, as we say. But whenever we talk about the specific jobs, we feel that we have a shortage of laborers. And compared with 5 years ago, we had back then serious problems. And we've seen a positive trend over the last 2 years. Things are getting better, meaning that we have more graduates and students that attend technical universities and colleges, training to become engineers or to become skilled workers. And this is something that is really becoming relevant for them. Their salaries are on the rise, and people want to be in the processing industry of the economy and in the industry in general. And that said, we have our own forecast, which is underpinned by world trends. By 2025, about 100 professions will be gone, will disappear, but an additional 100 will emerge. Is there such a profession now as the robotic operator? Who's manning them? A man, a human being. Is somebody taking a job from somebody else? No, I would say, because we now have new industries, new manufacturing facilities. We are modernizing our existing facilities, and we're expanding, but you can only expand if you automate your processes. We're not taking anything away from anyone. So if we're talking about the future for our country, for the industry that we are responsible for, issues related to automation and implementation of contemporary automated processes and implementation of robotics, this is a good challenge. We see a lot of opportunity there. And that'll be something that will ensure our competitiveness of our products, the reduction in cost and expenses. And any competitive product is always going to be in demand, not only on the domestic market, but on other markets as well. That's our goal. We want to enter other markets with our products. And over the recent years, as part of our import substitution program that we were sort of pushed towards by our Western colleagues by introducing sanctions against us. And journalists asked me today, did you talk about sanctions and trade wars today? I said, we haven't yet, but I'm sure we will talk about it. I'm not bringing this up as a topic, but nevertheless, since 2014, we have been pursuing this import substitution program across 22 industries or sectors of the economy. We are focused on working in that direction, and that allows us to say that in many of our industries, we have been able to ensure that we have substituted imports, but we're not doing just for the sake of doing this. We are a stable member of the international supply chains, and that is something that is good for our partners. It's good for us because we are always in shape and are aware of the existing trends. But speaking about export, let me say,
we set a goal for the next 5 years to double the supply of non-commodity, non-energy exports. So that is something relevant to my neighbor here. What to invest into in Russian economy. Non-commodity segment. We invite international partners and many Western companies, companies from the United States of America, are still present in Russia, and they are expanding the range of business they are doing to have an opportunity to work in this market and to supply to other countries from here. We create conditions for that. We provide financial stimulus to the companies that have financial potential.
In American English, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. So I think the sanctions made Russia much stronger in terms of its diversification. I'm going to see, Mr. Al-Mubarak, if my memory served me correctly, a base in Moscow, an office in Hong Kong, New York, Silicon Valley, Brazil, and looking at London. So you obviously don't want to make decisions by sitting in Abu Dhabi about where you're going to put your money because you want people on the ground. I asked about artificial intelligence and the technology portfolio you're putting together at MIC. You can touch on Russia, of course, if you want to, but how do you see leveraging the Sovereign Wealth Fund and the technology transfer to the UAE, and what looks appetizing in this space would you suggest at this stage?
Well, first of all, let me agree with my colleague, Minister Mantrov. The human component, when it comes to AI, is fundamental. So I agree completely on this. We should not forget that the human intelligence component of it is actually the base of where these machines are going to go.
So there's just no reason for alarm, is what you're suggesting?
No, wait.
If we plan for it.
Well, wait, let me finish my point. First of all, I would say every industry represented in this room is going to be impacted dramatically by AI within the next 10 years. And by the way, most of them within the next 5 years. AI is coming, it's coming fast, it's going to come at an incredible pace, and that's reality. We have a strong fundamental view, institutional view, about the speed and pace of how industries are going to be dramatically impacted, revolutionized with the impact of technology and with AI, and that speed of change. Companies, industries that are going to be embracing this and looking at how we can take advantage, come in as early as possible, invest as early as possible, are going to come out the winners in this. Industries and companies that are going to go defensive on this will lose, and will lose in a zero-end game here. They will not survive. That is my view. So from that perspective, I think the question on labor and how that's going to, this industry and how we look at this future is going to look like, it's going to be about retooling. There's no question about that. And I agree also with my colleagues, and I think Minister Mentrov mentioned it also, there's going to be new jobs. It's not like this is going to erase jobs and they will disappear. Yes, there are conventional jobs that will have to change and will be changed into a completely different type of job, different type of engineering, different type of sciences, different type of applications. And this is where I think countries that are able to start that retooling and that preparation from an education perspective, from a training and development perspective, these are the countries that I think will be in the forefront in handling this change that's going to happen. So that's really my view on that subject that I wanted to be clear on. From an investment perspective, there's no doubt, given what I just said, we are an investment institution that's, obviously investing all around the world. Our focus is in over 15 sectors. We invest in we have operations in over 50 countries. We invest from industries ranging from semiconductors to oil and gas, to petrochemicals, specialty chemicals, renewable energy, solar, wind, etc., etc. Every one of the industries, every single one of the industries that we're investing in will be impacted by AI. So from that perspective, the view we've taken is we have to aggressively look at the right opportunities and be in the space where we can find the right winners that are going to come out of the space. And we've been doing that. We've been investing in the United States, we've been investing in China, in Asia, in Europe, and looking for companies in the early stages, some in the more, let's say, in more later stage, that we think are going to be the winners. And here you have to make bets across the board. There is not going to be one winner, there's going to be many winners, but there's going to be leaders. Going back, there are 3 countries, in my view today, that will have a strong position in that space because of the human component that we discussed earlier. Because there's a science to it, there's no question, and which is the science, the R&D side, but there's also the commercialization. But just going back to the view here, the United States, there's no question, is a lead player in that space and will be heavily active, and you see that already within the industry. China absolutely is going to be in that space and is going head on. And I think there's incredible companies that are coming out of China in that space. And I believe for many of the factors that we discussed that my colleague to my right mentioned earlier, Russia has the capability to also play a big role in that space. There's no doubt about that. I think the human side of it, the scientific side, the engineering side is here. I mean, Russia has some incredible assets in that space. So I think for us, going back from an investment perspective, we are investing in the United States in that space. We are investing in China in that space. And certainly, we are looking to invest in Russia, and we'd be very interested to invest in that space in Russia.
Okay, very good. I think I should spend the next 5 minutes, and I know it's a very dear issue to the Director General, and I know His Excellency Minister Mazrui has been focusing on this as well. It touches upon Haldun al-Mubarak's comments. You have to have people trained for the job. And how is UNIDO supporting training? Because education in the next 10 years is going to be a revolution, because it's going to require flexibility and the ability to adapt to change. What are you doing at UNIDO? And maybe it's in partnership with the UAE and the GMIS to say you have to put this at the top of your policy priority list. I'm sure it's on your radar.
We actually develop all kinds of training programs for all member states, some attached to the project, because it's directly provided financing by the donor, and we develop the vocational training. Some of the training is on-the-job training. We believe that is very, very important, like industrial parks in Ethiopia, Senegal, and some other countries. When the FDI come into a country, they will bring the seed money, will bring the technology and access to market. One of the important aspects is on-job training. They need people to run the machine, run technology, produce products. So that will be a very big source of training. You need to also develop a kind of curriculum for entrepreneurship. This is actually free of charge. We provided to member countries attached to the high school, vocational school, and they use this kind of curriculum for the entrepreneurship training. We have an ITPO office in Bahrain, and that more than 15 years started training for women entrepreneurship, supported by the government, of course. Now it's so successful. Those are just a few examples of the different training. But we believe human resources development is so important apart from the formal education. Those kind of training are very important, especially for least developed countries, developing countries.
Which is the LDCs you talked about. Minister Mazrui, it's interesting because most people in the audience probably don't know that 10% of the population in the UAE are nationals. So it takes quite a personality to welcome the rest of the world to come to your desert sands and to take employment. How do you get society, Emirati society, but your total population, ready for the pace of change? Is it showing up in your education systems already as a Minister of Industry to foster this adaptation that I'm talking about?
Yes, I think the government of the United Arab Emirates have paid. First of all, we know that. We know education is going to be either an enabler or an issue if you don't do it right. That's why I think we have 3 ministers for education and higher education within the cabinets. And I think that is almost 10% of our cabinet, which is around 30 ministers. So 3 ministers out of 30 are looking at education and improving our education system to be capable of dealing with the challenges of the future, the technological, the 4th industrial revolution. We also have a Minister of State for the advanced science and application. And that also support the 3 ministers in looking at not only the education system, but also beyond the job and what are the applied sciences that we want to be engaging our population in. Among the audience here, we have also a group of young Emiratis, some of them students from our universities. We take them along where we go, where the industry and manufacturing, and those are the areas that we would like to focus on. We take them with us. Actually, one of our ministers, the Minister of Education, is with us, His Excellency Al-Hammadi, and this shows that we are focusing on the challenges and preparing ourselves for the 4th industrial revolution, preparing our students for the changing world that is happening. And like Khaldun said, it's coming, it's already happening, the 4th industrial revolution. Things are going to change in the next 5 or 10 years. We are engaging our students with the rest of the world. We don't distinguish in UAE among all of the people who are living with us. All of us are citizens or expats within the United Arab Emirates are keen on contributing. So whoever lives with us, they are also utilizing our education system, and we would like the whole 10 million to be the best of the best when it comes to the scientists of the future and the employees of the future to deploy the 4th industrial revolution technologies.
Okay. Final question for the panel, but I'm going to weave it together. I wrote a column recently on the VUCA world: volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. When I first heard that word, I didn't know what it was. I thought it was verruca, as in the common wart, so I had to go look it up. And it came from two professors from my alma mater in Los Angeles, USC. And they wrote it in the 1980s, but it seems to be more apropos today than ever before, right? Because of the level of uncertainty. In the context of the fourth industrial revolution and the challenges for the SDGs today, what do you see as the greatest risk to managing these dual challenges of the revolution and the SDG goals, which deal environment and poverty and access to water? Is it protectionism? Is it military security around the Gulf? I mean, what worries you the most that we don't get distracted? And I'll start with Haldun al-Mubarak on this. As an investor, no, but I think it's good to get your thoughts because you can invest anywhere in the world. What's your biggest risk to these dual challenges that we're facing between now and 2030 from the UAE perspective as a senior statesman?
Thank you, John, for making me first.
You're a quick thinker.
It's a challenging question. It's a big question. And I think the world has changed in such a pace over the last 10 years because of the role technology has played, because of how social media now is a big part of driving, change. And I'm, both on the positive, but also absolutely in the negative side. You look at how social unrest in many places around the world, economic stagnation. I mean, the world is facing a lot of challenges. Combined with that movement towards globalization and that resistance that you're seeing now with, you look at it, from the US being that leader of globalization to a new US which is, making, is having trade fights right, left, and front. So the world is changing in a way that's making it more and more unpredictable. So I would say the first thing that I would say is a challenge for the future is this unpredictability you have today in the geopolitical and economic front that you are seeing today in a way that you haven't seen as much in the past. So it's a new dynamic. It is extremely unpredictable. Within that unpredictability is the politics, which also has a reflection on the economic and the business side, ultimately from our perspective, because you're seeing these shifts from left to right, but really not just from left to right or from right to left. It is from far right to far left now. So you're seeing a wider range of shifts in policy, and you're seeing that everywhere. You see it in Europe, you're seeing it in North America, you're seeing it in South America. And that again adds an element of unpredictability and inconsistency, which I think will make it also very challenging in the future. Now, having said that, the change is happening. And I think, regardless what happens in the context of the unpredictability I've just described, the change is happening. And I look at it now from a business perspective, the opportunity. There's tremendous opportunity. There's tremendous challenges, but there's tremendous opportunities, and there's tremendous opportunities particularly for the type of investor that we are, which takes a long-term view. And I think that's how I look at the next 11 years from 2019 to 2030. I see a lot of change, I see a lot of unpredictability, but I also see a lot of opportunities. And I think from our perspective, as we shift in the way I've described our portfolio into many of these new sectors, these new areas, and if we make the right bets, which I'm hopefully confident we will make many good bets, I think that will be a good outcome for us, both institutionally, but more importantly as a country, because one thing the UAE is a very progressive country, and we're fast. And I think we try to learn fast, we try to pivot quickly, and we have, I think, an advantage being a small country with a small population. Our ability to pivot and our ability to put policy and then run with it is an advantage because of our size and our our relative size.
Okay, very good. In 30 seconds, if you don't mind, I had an interview with Sultan Al Mansouri, the long-serving Minister of Economy in the UAE, and he said in a small, fast-moving economy, we have to remain globalized. Can we protect globalization, do you think, Khaldun Mubarak, so it serves the needs of the UAE with the turbulence that we see today?
Yes, I think it is the sensible approach. It's the logical approach, and you see it now in many places that were not necessarily embracing it. I mean, I use China as an example. Look how China has pivoted. Look how China now is pushing that globalization agenda. Now we can debate the pros and cons of it, but the reality, they are moving in that direction, and there's many other countries that are doing that. So I think we have to continue to embrace it. I think it's real and it's positive, and I think there are learnings from the past that I hope many will take from and pivot towards the future.
Great. Minister Manturov, I laid out this VUCA world environment. You touched on protectionism. What do you think is the biggest challenge for Russia in this new complex world? And then I'm going to finish on our co-chairs. Your Excellency.
I was talking about protectionism because journalists asked me about it. And I said, probably we will walk away from nature-inspired technology in this panel. I tried to remind you of geese feathers and this thing and the other, shark skin, but it's not working out. I tried to drive you towards the main theme that has been identified for this panel. This is what we are here for.
Since we are talking about protectionism, I can talk about protectionism. Well, what are the challenges that I see? Mr. Mubarak just described how he analyzes the development of the economies. I can tell you what framework we exist in. And as the Minister for Industry and Trade of Russia, I can say that I'm often asked, can you tell me whether you have a plan B if there is a new package of sanctions imposed against Russia? And I say, no, we don't have a plan B. I cannot really imagine what our colleague from the White House can think up for yet another time and slap some sanctions or impose some conditions on us. I can't. But every time we live in this process whenever sanctions are applied at one facility, we always find a way to ensure that we can produce such products. Let's take the example of the MS-21 aircraft. That's a civil aircraft. It's not a military-related product. It's a direct competitor to Boeing 737. And we have calculated our capacity, and we can produce up to 100 aircraft a year. And we have friends at Boeing. They are my friends. We cooperate with them in a lot of ways, but they are competitors nonetheless. And right now, they are in a difficult situation. They have overproduced some types of aircraft. And I'm concerned for them. I'm not gleeful because of that. I come from the aircraft business to my current position. But competition has to be fair. Why would sanctions be imposed on a company that makes a composite wing for this aircraft? The sanctions were slapped on two facilities. Well, Air Composite is produced by a Russian company, but the Japanese were prohibited from sending fiber to the United States, a U.S.-based company, and the U.S. Company was not allowed to build Pripreni, which is the precursor for the material that's used in building the composite wing. Why did that happen? Is this something that affects the national security of the United States? No. But, I mean, could I foresee that happening? No, of course not. But I think it was fortunate that at some time before we intuited it. We started our own production of prepregs and the fibers. And next year, we'll get rid of this dependence. That's $2.5 million per plane. Who lost that amount of money? We? No. It's the loss to those companies that could supply those products working in cooperation, in international cooperation with the others, something that we were inspired to be involved in. That's not going to happen anymore. So that means we are going to be producing this on our own. We're going to be supplying it to ourselves. What's going to happen tomorrow? I don't know the answer to this question. But thank God we have our own engine for this plane. And by the way, I wanted to give you this as an example. Well, speaking about nature-inspired technologies, such technologies were used to produce parts of this engine. Bionic design, that's what's behind it. When you look at this part, it looks like a dinosaur bone, as you saw it in half, or a bone of some wild critter. It says that we were thinking about every micron of that engine to make sure that it is lighter, better, more competitive. And if we are not allowed to import American-made engines, we will have our own. So it's hard for me to predict what's going to happen tomorrow, but I can tell you one thing. We have a strategy for developing our own manufacturing industry. We are not saying no to any form of cooperation. We're always open to cooperation, and this is something that can be confirmed by our friends and partners that are sitting here with me at this panel discussion. We are inviting to invest in such areas as aircraft industry. But we wouldn't want everyone be investing, but those of the investors that are willing to share their technologies and their competencies, we are going to be willing to work with them in these areas. So we are open and ready for cooperation. And we count on common sense that should prevail to make sure that there is no more protectionism and unfair competition, which is too stringent. And as for the sanctions, you said that this is something that gives us a motivation, a challenge. It puts us in a position of discomfort, but that's okay. Let me give you another example from agriculture. In 2013, we exported about $16 million worth of agricultural produce. Last year, we set a new record, $26 million. 44 million tons of grain were exported. And when the return sanctions were imposed on products from Europe, on produce from Europe, our agriculture producers said thanks to us, because now they can develop their own production. Whether this is good or bad, well, at least at this point in time, that was a forced measure.
Is what you're suggesting?
Абсолютно.
Precisely. And that's what I'm hinting at. We have to adapt to the new challenges as they arise, and we will continue doing that in the future.
For the comprehensive answer. Our two co-chairs, start with Suhail Mazrui and then the Director General. And we don't have to finish on the risk. It was comprehensively covered by our two previous speakers. Are we able to adapt quick enough to this kind of VUCA world? It seems like the nimble survive in this environment. Minister?
I think it's challenging, as it was explained. It's not going to be easy. And I think the attraction for those who are able to deal with that challenge is going to be a business opportunity for them. And that's what we are hoping for. It's not going to be easy, but we are determined to try to take advantage of the knowledge, the know-how from an investment point of view, from a regulatory framework point of view, and we are mindful of the challenge, but we are hopeful as well that we can deal with it and take advantage of that situation.
Well, I have to commend both the UAE and UNIDO on this and bringing it to Russia, into the heartland of Russia. I didn't realize the complexity of this structure that you've developed to deal with both the fourth industrial revolution and also completion of the SDGs. What would you suggest, Director General, is the next goal as you march into Hanover in 2020? What advancements do you want to make in the institution of GMIS?
Yeah. John, this is a very important issue about the future GMIS. As I made it very clear in my statement, we will carry it over and over again because GMIS is a very important forum for us to move ahead with a global agenda. You mentioned the challenge and opportunities, but I've seen that this is a process, but we need education. We need to have a communication, share experience and best practices. GMIS is exactly designed for this kind of occasion. And also, I think lots of things changing in this world. Think about the climate change issue. If we take the 10 years ago, the situation, maybe not too many people worried about that. But now more and more people recognize that climate change is really a threat to humankind. So green industry, now every people talk about the green industry. The circular economy, you see that resource efficiency, circular economy is so popular everywhere. So I believe that like GMIS, we promote that and step by step, we will arrive at a certain stage. Final comment is we've seen the challenge, we've seen the opportunities, but opportunities, our IDR, Industrial Development Report 2016, pointed out a number that through the advanced innovation and the related process of the new industrial revolution and the can create economic effect of between 16 and 40 trillion US dollar globally every year by 2025. And then among these big numbers, developing countries would cover between 5 to 15 trillion US dollar every year. That means if country take action, take appropriate strategy, open the mind, learning each other, and with global support. And in such case, they still have a big room to move, to maneuver. So for this purpose, UNIDO would like to work together with our member states, like UAE, like Russia Federation, and also private sector to support a group of countries needed support most. That is our job. Thank you very much, John.
My pleasure. Speaking of planning, I have just one housekeeping tool here. The gala dinner is in the Yeltsin Center adjacent to the Hyatt Hotel. And the Russian government was very organized here because we have transfer buses waiting for people outside, so you don't have to worry about making your way there. It's in the Yeltsin Center right next to the gala, and it's going to start in exactly 1 hour, and why we're finishing. Let's give a nice round of applause. His Excellency Khaldoon Al-Mubarak, Minister Mantorov, thanks for the hospitality. Director General Lee and Minister Mazrui, thank you very much for the comprehensive discussion. Thanks.
Кроме меня никто не предложит.
And let us applaud to John, our great moderator for today, because if I didn't say this, nobody would.